So imagine you take an old painting, maybe something you found in an attic, to an antiques dealer.
Right, like an appraisal.
Exactly. And there is a very specific, almost, comforting rhythm to what happens next.
They pull out the little magnifying glass.
Yeah, the loop. They pull that out, they examine the brush strokes, they check the canvas quality, they cross-reference artist's history, and then this is the key part. They point to a number on a piece of paper and tell you exactly what it is worth.
Which is incredibly satisfying, honestly.
It really is. The entire process of appraisal is just so clean. I mean, it's calculated. We do it with houses, we do it with cars, we do it with entire companies.
Right, because there is this deep psychological comfort in being able to just categorize something, you put it in a box, assign it a definitive, visible value, and you're done.
Yeah, we rely on that precision to just, make the world make sense.
It creates order out of chaos, really. When we can quantify something, we feel like we can control it. The mathematics of appraisal basically strip away all those messy, subjective emotions and leave us with an objective reality that we can all just agree upon.
But, and here's the mission for today's deep dives, the moment we step out of the realm of physical objects and into the world of morality, specifically how we assign value to human life, that neat little appraisal system completely falls apart.
It shatters.
It really does. We're left standing in this incredibly murky moral landscape.
Yeah.
And, the default societal reaction, the platitude we all just drop into conversation constantly, is that human life is priceless.
Right, you can't put a price on a human life. We say it all the time.
We say it so easily. But today, for this deep dive, we are examining a piece of writing that argues something fundamentally deeply unsettling.
Oh, it's a heavy one today.
It is. The text argues that while we all agree that life is priceless in theory, our actions, the structures we build, and especially the things that trigger our outrage, well, they tell a completely different and much darker story.
Yeah, the premise we are analyzing today centers entirely on human life value and our total lack of moral consistency.
Right.
We're looking at a brief but relentlessly dense excerpt. It's simply titled, "What is the Value of a Life?"
And it's not a standard essay, is it?
Not at all. It functions less like a traditional essay and much more like a philosophical mirror. I mean, it essentially forces a confrontation with the gap between what we claim to believe about the sanctity of life and how we actually behave in reality.
And I'll warn you right now, this is not going to be a comfortable reflection.
No, it's pretty confrontational.
The author speaks from a place of just deep exhaustion, starting right off with this admission that they never even imagined having to articulate something so basic.
Which implies that society has either regressed or we've just built up so many layers of self-deception that we've completely lost the plot on a fundamental human truth.
Exactly. So to understand this disconnect, we have to start where the author starts. And it's this brilliant, if slightly jarring rhetorical move.
It's very unexpected.
Yeah, they take this deeply emotional, almost spiritual concept of human worth, and they ground it in a cold economic analogy. They ask us to consider the dollar bill.
Right. The text establishes that every single dollar is fundamentally identical in its inherent worth.
Okay, break that down, Darius.
So a dollar might have a different serial number, right? It might have a different signature from the Secretary of the Treasury, depending on the year.
Sure.
But you could spend it, you can save it, you can invest it, but the baseline value of that currency remains mathematically constant. It is always exactly $1.
I have to admit, my immediate reaction to this when I first read it was just resistance.
Oh, same here. It feels a bit cold.
It really does. On the surface, comparing a human life to fiat currency feels inherently flawed. I mean, dollars are literally manufactured to be commodified.
Right, they are tools.
Exactly, they're designed to be traded, spent, and exhausted. When I think of the phrase, human life is priceless, the entire point is that you cannot reduce a person to a tradable commodity.
Right, it feels like it contradicts the whole premise.
Yeah. So why do you think the author chose money as the foundational analogy for human worth? It seems so counterintuitive.
Well, because the author is essentially hijacking our absolute certainty about economics to expose our uncertainty about morality.
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about it. We live in a society that implicitly, without any question, understands the rules of currency. You don't have to convince anyone that a dollar is worth a dollar.
Right. It is a universal language.
Exactly. By using that specific framework, the argument bypasses our philosophical defenses. It forces us to apply the rigid, unquestionable logic of economics to the way we treat people.
I see. So we don't debate the value of a dollar, but we constantly debate the value of a person.
Precisely.
Let me throw an extension of this analogy out there, because this really helped clarify exactly what the author's getting at for me.
Let's hear it.
Okay, think about a crisp, brand new dollar bill, freshly printed from the mint. The edges are sharp, it's perfectly clean.
Straight from the bank.
Yeah. Now think about a crumpled, torn, stained dollar bill that has been, I don't know, through the washing machine 3 times and taped back together.
The ones vending machines always reject.
Exactly. But when you take both of those to the grocery store, they spend exactly the same. The cashier doesn't look at the torn one and say, well, this one is dirty and damaged, so it's only worth 80 cents.
Right. The physical condition doesn't alter the baseline value at all.
So is that what the author's getting at with the people comparison?
That is the exact mechanism of the analogy. When the text mentions that dollars have different serial numbers or signatures, it is mapping demographic differences onto the currency.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what are the serial numbers of a human life in this context?
They are things like race, religion, socioeconomic status, physical ability, nationality.
I see.
The author is insisting we view these differences as purely superficial markers. Just like the scotch tape on a torn dollar bill doesn't change its purchasing power, a person's socioeconomic status or physical condition shouldn't change their fundamental right to exist and be valued.
Which brings us to a phrase in the text that carries massive philosophical weight. The author states that every life possesses intrinsic value.
Yes, intrinsic is doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
It really is. Can we just camp out on that word for a second? What does intrinsic actually mean in this context?
It is the absolute linchpin of the entire argument. To understand the gravity of intrinsic value, we really have to look at what it excludes.
Okay, what does it exclude?
If value is intrinsic, it means it is built in. It is essential to the nature of the thing itself. Therefore, the value is not earned.
Wait, not earned. But society is obsessed with earning our worth.
I know, it flies in the face of everything we are taught. But under this philosophy, you do not gain your value by being a productive member of society or a brilliant artist or, a morally upright citizen.
So it's just a given.
Exactly. And conversely, and perhaps much more importantly for this text, value is not lost by being poor, uneducated, incarcerated, or struggling with addiction.
A value just is.
It just is. It is a baseline that absolutely cannot be altered by circumstance or behavior.
Which makes the author's next rhetorical move just so brutal. They use those specific financial verbs, spent, saved, invested, and demand we apply them to human life.
Yeah, they really push the metaphor to its limit.
They do. So when you strip away the metaphor, how does a society actually spend or invest a human life?
Well, it translates into a direct critique of our socioeconomic systems and how they distribute resources.
Give me an example of how we invest a life.
Okay, we invest in certain lives through elite education, generational wealth transfers, and pristine preventative health care. We surround those specific lives with infrastructure designed to maximize their potential.
And we save lives too, right?
Yeah, we save certain lives by creating robust social safety nets, gated communities, and highly favorable legal structures.
Okay, but then there's the dark side of that verb structure. We spend other lives.
We do. We treat them as expendable commodities.
Right. We spend them in dangerous labor environments where safety regulations are completely ignored. We spend them in conflicts. Or, I think most insidiously, we spend them by simply allowing them to be consumed by the daily friction of a society that refuses to provide for their basic needs.
Exactly. But the author's core premise remains unbroken here. Regardless of how society treats the individual, whether they are invested heavily or spent ruthlessly, their intrinsic worth remains equal to all the others.
So the system's treatment of the person does not dictate the person's actual value.
Right. The appraisal is always the same, even if the treatment is wildly different.
Okay, so if we accept that baseline, that every single life holds this equal, unalterable intrinsic value, we crash right into the author's central ultimatum.
This is where the text becomes incredibly uncomfortable.
It really does. It states, and I'll just quote it directly, all lives are important or they are not. You make the decision, you can't have it both ways.
It is a rigid, uncompromising, binary choice.
It really is. The author is deliberately stripping away every single societal defense mechanism we have built.
Yeah, because as human beings, we violently resist that kind of binary.
We do. We love nuance. We are wired to seek context. I mean, we rely on triage both medically and socially.
Triage is a great example.
Right. If there is a disaster, an emergency room naturally has to rank who gets saved first based on survivability. We are so used to saying, well, yes, all lives matter, but this person made terrible choices, or this person is a direct threat to others.
We constantly look for caveats.
Exactly. I can easily see someone arguing that human survival actually depends on our ability to rank the value of a life in a crisis. So why is the author flatly refusing to let us have any middle ground here?
Because the moment you introduce a sliding scale of human value, you destroy the entire philosophical foundation of human rights.
Wow. Okay, explain that.
Universal human rights only function if they are, in fact, universal. If you concede that even one life has slightly less value based on their circumstances, their behavior, or their location, you are immediately creating a system where someone gets to decide who sits at the top of the scale and who sits at the bottom.
And somebody always has to be at the bottom.
Always. And history is essentially a long, violent ledger demonstrating that whoever holds the power to create that scale will always put themselves at the pinnacle and the vulnerable at the bottom.
So it is a logical trap.
It absolutely is.
If you agree with a torn dollar bill analogy, that the dirty dollar and the clean dollar hold the exact same intrinsic value, you literally cannot logically escape this binary.
You literally cannot have it both ways. You either believe intrinsic value exists or you believe value is conditional.
And notice the phrasing there. You make the decision. The author refuses to be a passive narrator.
They are placing the moral burden directly onto the shoulders of the reader. It is a demand for an internal audit.
So let's do that audit right now for you listening. Think about your own media consumption over the last month or so.
This is a tough exercise, but a necessary one.
Yeah. When you scroll past a headline about a casualty in a wealthy, familiar neighborhood in your own city versus a casualty in a distant, impoverished nation, do you feel the exact same level of tragic loss?
Does your heart drop in the exact same way?
Right. If we are being completely honest with ourselves, most of us have to admit that our internal emotional reactions are not perfectly equal.
No, they rarely are.
We subconsciously rank tragedy based on proximity and familiarity. We really do try to have it both ways.
And this actually brings up a well-documented psychological phenomenon. It's called the identifiable victim effect.
Oh, I've heard of this. What is that exactly?
So humans are wired to offer vast amounts of empathy and resources to a single identifiable victim, like a face, a name, a relatable circumstance. Think of a local news story about a specific family.
Right. Everyone donates to the GoFundMe immediately.
Exactly. But as the number of victims increases, or as they become more statistically abstract and physically distant, our empathy actually decreases.
That is so messed up, but so true.
It is a cognitive flaw. And the author is demanding that we recognize this flaw and intellectually override it. Because if we accept the binary that all lives must be equally important, we are forced to look at how our society actually operates in practice.
Which exposes a massive, deeply disturbing contradiction in our collective behavior.
The core of the author's argument.
Yeah, the text highlights a profound disparity in how we perceive the loss of life, based entirely on the mechanism of death.
Right, how the person died.
It argues that lives extinguished through acts of violence face widespread condemnation. But lives lost due to systemic inequalities, poverty and a lack of access to essential resources like healthcare, are frequently just overlooked.
Despite the author insisting these deaths are equally tragic.
This is the crux of the moral inconsistency. The author is drawing a really stark line between visible violence and invisible neglect.
Right. The argument is that the end result, which is the loss of an intrinsically valuable human life, is completely identical.
The person is gone either way.
Exactly. Therefore, if our morality is actually consistent, our societal reactions should be identical.
Let's ground this in an analogy of active versus passive harm, because I think it helps visualize what the author means.
Okay, let's hear it.
Society treats violent death like a sudden, raging house fire.
Okay, that makes sense.
When a house is on fire, it demands immediate attention. Sirens wail. The neighborhood runs outside in an absolute panic. News helicopters are circling overhead to broadcast the flames live.
It's a spectacle of tragedy.
It is. And in the aftermath, there's an absolute demand for justice. We want to know who started the fire, why the smoke alarms failed, and we want to know how to punish the arsonist. The outrage is immediate, and it is very loud.
And a systemic death like dying from poverty, or a lack of access to clean water, or the inability to afford basic medication like insulin is treated entirely differently.
Right. We treat systemic death like a slow, invisible carbon monoxide leak.
Oh, that's a chilling comparison.
It is just as deadly as the raging fire. It kills you just as permanently. But because there is no loud explosion, because there are no dramatic flames to film on a smartphone, society just sleeps right through it.
We don't panic. The evening news doesn't interrupt its broadcast for a carbon monoxide leak of poverty.
No, we don't demand immediate answers or drag public officials into the street over it.
And the psychology behind this disparity is actually deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology.
Wait, really? It's biological?
Yeah, our brains are essentially these sophisticated threat detection machines, but they are incredibly antiquated.
Like running old software.
Exactly. The amygdala is wired to react viscerally to physical threats, predatory behavior, sudden movements, the evolutionary equivalent of a tiger jumping out of the brush.
Right, fight or flight.
We immediately recognize a person with a weapon as a direct, active threat. We are not, however, evolved to recognize bureaucratic violence.
Bureaucratic violence, that is a heavy term.
Well, a spreadsheet that denies a life-saving medical procedure does not trigger our fight or flight response, even though it is just as lethal as a weapon.
It's vital to pause here, actually, and clarify something regarding the author's intent, especially since we're using terms like bureaucratic violence.
Good idea.
We are discussing highly charged concepts, systemic inequality, poverty, healthcare access, and these topics usually, almost immediately, trigger partisan political debates.
Right. People immediately jump to policy, taxation, government intervention.
Exactly. So it is very important to note here, for you listening, that the author is setting aside specific political policies. They aren't pushing a specific healthcare bill or a particular economic framework in this text.
We aren't endorsing any either.
Right. We are strictly arguing the underlying moral philosophy here. The premise is simply that the mechanism of death does not change the intrinsic loss of the life. We are examining that philosophical premise objectively.
Right, without endorsing a specific political worldview. The text really forces us to look past the political noise and just focus on the language of the loss itself.
The language is so deliberate.
It is. Look at the specific verbs the author chooses. They write that some lives are extinguished through acts of violence.
Extinguished.
Yes. The word extinguished implies an active, deliberate force. Someone is literally holding the extinguisher.
There is a perpetrator.
Exactly. And psychologically, humans deeply crave a villain. When we can point our finger at an individual perpetrator, it is incredibly satisfying because it isolates the problem.
Right. If we find the bad apple, the rest of the barrel is fine.
We can lock the villain away and feel safe again.
But when describing systemic issues, the text completely changes its tone. It says lives are lost due to lack of access.
Lost due to.
It is a fascinating phrase because it feels so incredibly passive. It sounds like a tragic accident, you know. It sounds like someone getting caught in a hurricane or an earthquake.
An act of God, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It implies an inevitable circumstance rather than a deliberate human choice.
And the author's entire point is that this passive phrasing is a collective lie we tell ourselves to soothe our conscience.
Oh, wow. A collective lie.
Think about it. A lack of access to resources isn't a force of nature. It is the direct result of a human-made system.
But why do we maintain this lie? Why do we tolerate the invisible deaths of the carbon monoxide leak while violently condemning the house fire?
Well, the author refuses to let society off the hook by claiming ignorance here. They provide a very specific and very challenging reason.
Yes, they do. The text states that these systemic deaths are, quote, frequently overlooked or justified in the name of profit.
That is a staggering accusation.
It is. It forces us to ask what the author actually means by profit here. Because, I mean, are we talking about a cartoonish scenario where executives sit in a smoky boardroom, run a literal cost-benefit analysis on human lives, and actively decide to let people die to boost the quarterly earnings?
It's not usually that cinematic, but it brings the entire argument full circle back to the dollar analogy.
Okay, connect those dots for me.
The text suggests that while a human life should have the unquestionable intrinsic value of $1 in our theoretical framework, in reality, our systems prioritize actual dollars over human life.
The literal currency wins out over the metaphorical currency of human worth.
Exactly. But the mechanism of that prioritization is rarely a villain in a smoky room. It is much more insidious than that.
How so?
It is what the philosopher Hannah Arendt might call the banality of evil, but translated into modern bureaucracy.
The banality of evil.
Right. It isn't a single person waking up and choosing to cause harm. It is a corporate policy that prioritizes efficiency over workplace safety.
Oh, I see.
It is a healthcare algorithm specifically designed to maximize margins by minimizing coverage. It is a zoning law that pushes industrial pollution into impoverished neighborhoods.
Because it's cheaper.
Exactly. These systems are explicitly designed to create vast, comfortable distances between the decision makers and the human consequences of those decisions.
That distance is the absolute key to all of this.
It is.
Because if an executive had to physically walk into a patient's home, sit in their living room, look them in the eye and say, I am denying your treatment and ending your life because it improves my profit margin, the vast majority of human beings psychologically could not do it.
They would break.
They would. But if the system does it automatically, if the denial comes via an automated letter generated by an algorithm halfway across the country, it becomes palatable.
The distance creates the space necessary to excuse the outcome.
Which leads directly to the author's use of the word hypocrisy.
Yeah.
The final paragraph is just a blistering indictment.
Put some hold back.
I'll read it. The hypocrisy lies in your selective outrage. We decry violence while turning a blind eye to the suffering caused by economic injustice. We condemn those who take lives with weapons, but we often excuse those who do so through neglect and exploitation.
Selective outrage.
That phrase is a direct assault on our complacency.
It forces us to dissect the cognitive dissonance required to just function in modern society.
Think about how we manage to hold two completely opposing realities in our heads at the exact same time.
We do it every day.
We do. We weep over the victim of a violent crime on the evening news. We hold candlelight vigils. We demand that the mayor do something immediately.
As we should.
Of course. But the very next morning, we walk past a person dying of exposure on the street, or we read a staggering statistic about maternal mortality rates in underfunded hospitals, and we just accept it.
We categorize one as an unacceptable tragedy that demands immediate intervention, and we categorize the other as sad but normal background noise.
Right. That's just the way the economy works, we tell ourselves.
And the author argues that this division is a complete illusion. It is a fiction we mutually agree upon to feel civilized while actively participating in a system that benefits some at the direct expense of others.
It's an agreement to look the other way.
Notice the word excuse in the text, too. Systemic neglect isn't an accident. Excusing requires an active, conscious choice.
We choose to look away.
We choose to accept the rationale that resources are scarce and therefore, inevitably, some people must just lose out.
But if we apply the rigid logic of the binary we talked about earlier, all lives are important or they are not, the excuse of scarce resources instantly collapses.
It evaporates.
Think about it personally for a second.
Yeah.
If your own child needed a life-saving surgery, you would never, ever accept scarce resources or budgetary constraints as a valid reason for them to be denied.
Never.
You would fight, you would scream, you would tear the entire system down to save them. And the author is demanding that we exhibit that exact same level of primal, unyielding outrage for the stranger who is denied.
Which is an almost impossible moral standard.
It feels impossible.
It requires expanding our sphere of empathy to encompass everyone equally, without exception, essentially overriding our own evolutionary programming.
Because the text is pointing out that our outrage is currently calibrated entirely by proximity, familiarity, and the type of weapon used, rather than by the actual intrinsic loss of human value.
Exactly. We condemn the man who uses a weapon, but we excuse the system that uses neglect and exploitation.
The text puts them on the exact same moral plane. Taking a life with a gun and taking a life through economic exploitation are, in the eyes of this author, the exact same violation of human worth.
And this deeply challenges our traditional definition of a perpetrator.
How so?
Well, we usually define a perpetrator as a single individual acting with malicious, conscious intent, right? Like a criminal.
Right.
But this argument expands that definition to include systems, institutions, and even our own societal indifference.
Wow.
If a society possesses the resources to prevent death, to fix the carbon monoxide leak, so to speak, but chooses not to in order to preserve profit or comfort, then the society itself becomes the perpetrator.
That shifts the burden of responsibility in a really profound way. It forces you to reevaluate your own participation in society.
It really does. If you are benefiting from a system that relies on the exploitation and neglect of others, and you remain silent because it doesn't directly affect your proximity, this logic suggests you are complicit in that selective outrage.
That is a tough pill to swallow. And the text concludes with a final, definitive command. It doesn't ask a question, it it issues an instruction.
It really does. It's time to recognize that all lives are precious. All of them, period.
All of them, period. It lands with the weight of a hammer. I mean, there is no room for debate there.
None at all. It preemptively shuts down any attempt to introduce caveats, conditions, or exceptions.
Looking at the structure of this argument, the intellectual journey is honestly masterful.
It is tightly wound.
It starts with something incredibly mundane and universally understood, a dollar bill, a piece of paper we handle without a second thought.
A very safe starting point.
Right. But from that safe starting point, it forces a confrontation with a rigid, uncomfortable binary about intrinsic worth.
And once you are trapped in that binary, you are forced to look into the mirror and acknowledge your own selective outrage, contrasting visible violence with invisible neglect.
So, how do you actually apply this to your daily life? The author's challenge is for you to audit your own reactions.
That's the actionable takeaway here.
Yeah. The next time you are scrolling through your news feed or watching a broadcast, pay close attention to your internal emotional temperature.
Notice which stories make your blood boil and compel you to act, and which stories you just scroll past with a resigned sigh.
Exactly. Ask yourself why the mechanism of the tragedy changes your level of outrage, even when the outcome, a lost human life, is exactly the same.
And this naturally leads to a thought experiment to truly visualize the moral consistency the author is demanding.
Let's do it.
Let's imagine a society that actually internalized this premise. A society that truly believed, down to its absolute core, that all lives are intrinsically equal, and that a life lost to systemic neglect is exactly as tragic and urgent as a life lost to violence.
Okay, let's build out what that would actually look like in practice. Right now, if there is an armed bank robbery that ends in a tragic death, the local news immediately cuts into regular programming.
Right, breaking news graphics everywhere.
They dispatch reporters to stand out in the cold behind yellow police tape. The anchor uses their most serious, urgent cadence. The police chief gives a stern press conference, vowing to leave no stone unturned, promising the community that the perpetrator will be found and justice will be served.
Now, apply that exact same level of journalistic urgency, that exact same societal panic and demand for accountability to a systemic death.
Imagine turning on the 6 o'clock news, and the red breaking news graphic flashes across the screen with that urgent pounding music.
Right.
And the anchor looks into the camera with absolute gravity and says, "Tragedy struck our city today. A local resident has died because they could not afford their prescribed insulin."
But they don't report it as a sad statistic.
No, they report it as a crime. They cut to a reporter standing live outside a pharmaceutical headquarters or a regional health insurance office, standing behind yellow police tape.
And instead of a police chief, you have a high-ranking city official giving a somber press conference.
Yes, vowing to investigate the supply chains, the pricing structures, and the algorithms that allowed this fatal neglect to occur in the first place.
They promise the public that the system will be interrogated and held accountable for this unacceptable loss of precious human life.
Think about how jarring that broadcast would feel. It would feel almost absurd to our modern sensibilities.
It really would. Seeing economic injustice treated with the same immediate, breathless panic as a violent crime feels completely alien to us.
But according to the rigid logic of the text we just analyzed, that broadcast is the only morally consistent way to report the news.
If we watched that broadcast every single night, if we were relentlessly, visibly confronted with the true human cost of our systems, without the buffering excuse of "that's just how things work," our society would be forced to change.
It would have to. The selective outrage would become impossible to maintain under that kind of daily scrutiny.
It really makes you reconsider that comforting thought we started with.
About appraisals.
Yeah. We love to say human life is priceless, but maybe the problem isn't that we can't appraise the value of a life.
What do you mean?
Maybe the terrifying truth is that we appraise it every single day in 1,000 invisible ways, and we're just absolutely terrified to look at the receipt.